Hello, and welcome to my presentation, Violence and Manipulation, Hotline Miami. People are violent, the people who manipulate them. So we're going to just jump right in with what exactly is Hotline Miami. Well, Hotline Miami is, as Eurogamer puts it, a retro-styled, top-down fuck-em-up. It was released in 2012, towards the end of the year, and it was made by Donation Games. It's a two-man operation comprised of Jonathan Soderstrom, also known as Cactus, and Dennis Winden. And they are both located out of Sweden. And Cactus might be better known for his Flash games that were published on the Adult Swim website. Now, before we go on, I'd like to discuss a little bit of theory. And to start off with, I'll talk about Ivan Pavlov and conditioning. Basically, he did a study and found that there are two types of responses that living creatures usually give off. There are innate responses, or unconditioned responses, and learned responses, or conditioned responses. And he proved this with an experiment involving some dogs where they would salivate at food. That's the innate response. But as he continuously rung a bell whenever there was food, he eventually trained the dogs to, he conditioned them, as it were, to salivate at the ringing of the bell as opposed to just the food. And for the purpose of this discussion, there are two types of conditioning that I'd like to look at. The first one is conditioning via reward, where you reward desired behavior. You give a dog a treat for salivating at a bell. The other one would be a conditioning through fear, which would be if they don't salivate when they ring the bell, you hit the dog so that they salivate so they don't get hit again. And for the purpose of our discussion, we're going to take violence as an innate response. And for this, we have Walter Cannon and others who published a book, Bodily Changes in Hunger, Fear, Pain, and Rage in 1916. It was 4 years of research that stated that there are four primitive experiences that all living creatures have: hunger, pain, fear, and rage. And these are responses to high-stress situations that all living creatures have. And for our purposes, there are two we're going to look at: fear, to escape; rage, to fight. And this was, again, proven more recently with neurological testing in mice, where they looked at brain scans of the mice as they reacted these ways, in experiments done in the mid-90s. Now, there are some other theories as well that I'd like to go over. The first one being covering Kenji Yoshino, the idea that there's a true self and a false self, and one protects the other until the other's ready. James Paul G would like to look at for embodiment, video games and embodiment, which is basically the idea that the player goes into a game with his own motivations, or her own motivations, separate from whatever the player character might experience. And then Mikhail Foucault we'd like to look at, or Mikhail Foucault, for social panopticons, the idea that there are parameters in society that influence control in people, like laws, reputation, punishment. And so now we're going to jump back into Hotline Miami, fight or flight, that innate response. In the gameplay, this is reflected in all the programmed AI characters, the enemies you come across. They have some basic functions: kill the player, run away, and when they're not doing either of those two things, they are just gonna wait around or patrol. And they run away when they don't have a weapon. If they do have a weapon, they'll kill the player. Those are just the two things that they are kind of programmed to do. It's in their nature, so to speak. It's the basic thing that they do. Quick, fast, easy. Now, in the player mechanics, we have roughly the same thing happening. They all revolve around killing and surviving. You get to run, you get to punch, take weapons, use weapons. When you run out of ammo, you can throw the weapons away as using them as another weapon, basically. And you can also grab enemies, just, an extension of the punch. You could use them as human shields, or you can just finish them off quickly. And next I have a small video clip here where you get to see this in motion, basically. It's a tutorial from Hotline Miami, and we get to see all of this in one fell swoop. Here we get to see, here's the character, runs up, they back away because they don't have weapons. And him, you can see grab, that one he kicked him. There you get to see gun, the other one had a bat, which you get to use to shoot another dude. And so it's all just very there. Now, conditioning in Hotline Miami, we have the narrative. We have Jacket, who is the main character. He has no name, the community just refers to him as Jacket because of the iconic Letterman's jacket that he wears all the time. He receives a mysterious answering machine message, and he receives a lot of them, telling him to go to a location and kill everyone there. The first time he receives a package with a note and a mask at his door. And in this one, the note has the instructions, and part of those instructions are to wear the mask during hits. Now, Jacket acquires a lot of masks during his little adventure, which ties back a bit to the covering, as, at least at the start, Jacket uses these masks as a way to let his inner violence out while supposedly protecting his civilized nature, because really, he's the hero. He's not supposed to be this psychopathic, violent person, but he needs to in order to, get the job done. Here we have a video showing this, first time that it happens. He gets the call, and he also has the package. And here we have the last line, very important, failure is not an option, we are watching you. We get a panopticon from all of this. We establish an unknown authority who knows how to get to Jacket. They know where he lives. They have unknown levels of influence because, obviously, they're hiring one assassin with Jacket. Who knows how many others they have. And they've also stated that they are willing to use force to punish failure. And so, if they have all these assassins, if Jacket doesn't do what he's being forced to do, then what happens? Do they send an assassin after him? But now, there's the flip side with the player, because, as stated with G, there are reasons to look at the player different from the player character. And so here, we have a lot more gameplay mechanics factoring into this. Here we have the player being conditioned by a reward, as opposed to Jacket, who's conditioned by fear. Whenever the player kills, he gets a higher score, or she gets a higher score. There's audio-visual gratification. There's also visceral gratification, because there's blood everywhere. It's very graphic. And also, the big key here, you get to progress through the game. Here we get to see all this kind of play out in motion. The last person in the room gets to move on. We get to see the blinking lights, the flashing lights. There we get to see you die. It's a very quick respawn. There's very little loss of progress when you die, and you keep getting graded on your score for how you do, and it all goes together. Now here we get to sum up Jacket real quick. At first he's used to show the authorities' punishment. He is the tool of fear, as opposed to the recipient, and he's ordered to kill another assassin who supposedly isn't doing his job. Later on, he does become the recipient. As we see here in this clip, he's returning home, and someone's waiting in his room, killed his girlfriend, and, I'll let this clip speak for itself. Now, this ends up putting Jacket into a coma, and really, some time passes, which he comes to the realization, or at least he's told by his inner conscious, or the demons that haunt him, that he will never learn the truth. But when he does wake up, this sends him into kind of a spiral to try and find out the truth and have vengeance against the people that did this to him. And so, when he wakes up from a coma, the first thing that he does is he goes after the person that shot him, the man with the rat mask, which leads him to raid a police station and then take out not just the person that killed him, but also some other establishments that the mafia controls, before he eventually makes it to the mob boss's mansion, works his way up to the mob boss, and tries to find vindication by slipping a bullet into his head, without any other full explanation for why the mob boss is doing what he was doing. And that ends Jacket's story in the game. He never really does find out what's going on. But that's because there's a twist. It turns out that the Russian mob is not behind all of this. Instead, it's a couple of guys with an elaborate phone tapping network that are seeking to destabilize the Russian-American coalition. Jacket, as I said before, never actually learns about this. But this leads me to another character, Helmet, who is a more self-defined character. He actually has dialogue, unlike Jacket, and he states that he chose to get involved, and the excitement is gone, and now he wants out, as we see here in the first clip that we're introduced to Helmet as a player character. He's already shown to be violent, even just strangling the man that got him involved so he can get out. He also only uses one type of weapon, and only has one mask, his motorcycle helmet, which isn't so much a mask, so much as just part of his raw identity, which is established that he is a violent person, and he's in touch with that violent nature. He is a biker, he's not someone to be brutally controlled so much, or at least he is solid enough that controlling him would be extremely hard. And that's why he kind of wants to get out of this, and he wants to try and find out the truth behind all of this. Here we just have some gameplay to show that also his segments of the game might be somewhat easier in comparison to Jacket's as well. Once again showing perhaps that he's honed his skills a little bit better as well, more in touch with his violent nature. You see that he can't pick up any other weapons, all he has is that cleaver, which he starts off with. Now, Phone Home, it's kind of a submission, but it's a very important point in the game, I feel. It's when Jacket and Helmet meet, because when Jacket is used as the tool of fear, the person that he's being sent to kill is Helmet, during his search to try and break out of all of this. Here, from Jacket's perspective, we see the Phone Home building. Helmet's already arrived, and Jacket approaches and we get the confrontation. And in this case, we see Helmet is, unfortunately, defeated. Or fortunately, depending on what you think. Of course, because you get to play as Helmet later, you get to see this from a different perspective. Where here we have Helmet, before Jacket arrives, running around, killing everyone as he makes his way towards the main room with the computer that he can use to trace the people making the phone calls with. And then Jacket shows up, and here we have the confrontation again from another perspective. Of course, something different happens this time. Helmet wins. Now, there are a couple of reasons, or a couple of conclusions that can be made about this. Some possible meanings. That there are two separate interpretations with either Jacket or Helmet's scenarios being just, well, what if they didn't die? Now, the next possible meaning would be that Jacket is in a post-death purgatory. For the whole game, he's dead, and all of this is just some afterlife trying to tell him to try and come to terms with his violent nature, that he's done horrible things before he gets sent to metaphorical hell, or whatever. But the next one would be perhaps the most likely, considering that Soderstrom has announced in the sequel Jacket will be making an appearance. That is, that Jacket was in a coma dream, at least for basically the whole part of the story up until he wakes up. That Helmet did win that fight, but because of the conditioning that Jacket has experienced while he's in a coma, he comes up with this elaborate scenario to try and cover his guilt in order to try and convince himself that he's still the hero, so he can go on and keep killing Russians, thinking that he is doing the right thing. Which, it's not exactly set in stone. As I mentioned before, there's an unreleased sequel. Jacket's gonna be in it in some form, and when I say sequel, it's actually gonna be a sequel. It takes place after the game, so the implication would be that Jacket lives. Now, tossing back to the player, we get to see here that when you go through the phone home level as Helmet, you don't actually have to kill anyone in the building. This is a very strong statement on the conditioning of the player, where it shows that even though all the parts of the wall of the panopticon have fallen down, there is an expectation of what to do in the player's head, that they just keep doing it. If you watched in the previous footage, the score stops being tallied at this point. If you kill any of the innocent civilians, you don't actually get any score for it. Now, to get to the point, we're going to get to what I think the statement Hotline Miami is trying to make, and what I've been leading up to it's trying to say. Here, we take a look at just the final confrontation that Helmet has with the two people at the top of the panopticon. They say that they're patriotic, they say that they're nationalists, and that they want to topple the American-Russian coalition to try and restore America to a former glory. And that's why they want to use fear to try and get these assassins to take out the Russian mob as part of this striking against. But they also state that it's only the tip of the iceberg, that they are. That there's already other sectors with more people like them, and powerful people are already on their side. And at the end, you can choose to kill these two, or you can choose to just walk away, but in the end, and they say this, it doesn't matter. And once again, the ending doesn't change whether you kill them or not. And so, the message I see here that Hotline Miami is trying to say is kind of twofold, with the first part being how the mechanics are structured, that violence is just an innate thing to all of us as people, no matter how civilized we are. This, I think, is part of the bigger statement that they're trying to make, which is that people with enough influence can bring out this violence in everyone, basically, and warp it to not just be a high-stress reaction, but to be something more sinister, like racism, perhaps to start a war. I'm not going to bring up any specific real-world examples, although I'm sure plenty can be made. But at the end of the day, I think Hotline Miami makes this statement, whether you agree with it or not. Thank you.